Hello and welcome to a new video, and today I want to go over replay from tearlaments format. And I hope you followed the Twitter drama between Galzo and pokeduels TCG, where Galzo challenged a Pokemon player to a $1,000 money match in tearlaments format and then lost it. $1,000 lost. But I don't want to talk too much about the entire drama because Nash already made a video covering it, including an analysis of the $1,000 money match replay. Instead, I want to showcase you the format in general, and I have also a tournament announcement for you. Let's talk about the format in general, because technically there were 3 tearlaments formats. The first one, YCS Pasadena and YCS Dortmund with Mystic Mine legal and Herald at 3. And then YCS Sydney format with Mystic Mine banned and Herald at 1 that is currently used by Format Library. And then we have the Yugioh format with the December Banlist and the Photon Hypernova support legal. That means we have Tier Cash, Bystil Boldrake, Trust, and the second wave of Cash Tier support legal in the Yugioh format but not legal in Sydney format. And I hope that the Yugioh format gets added in the future, but now let's dive deeper into Sydney format. And the deck building in this format is pretty much straightforward, so you play 3 of each tier name except for Rhinoheart, because most people prefer to play 2 copies of Rhinoheart. 3 is not needed because we just mill the entire deck while performing the combo. And then 3 Polar Rhino, 1, 2 or 3 Scream, depends on personal preference, 1 or 2 Salik, and then 0 or 1 Crime in the main deck, and if you don't main deck Crime, you should probably side deck the card for going first. And then you play 1 Instant Fusion, because with Instant Fusion you can summon Kid Carlos, probably the most broken card in the entire deck. Then Terraforming to grab the Pearl Rhino, and then for the Ishizu cards, you should probably play 6 of all of the Shufflers, and then 3 Kelbeck, because Kelbeck can be a hand trip going second in the mirror match. And then 1, 2 or 3 Agido, because Agido is not as strong as Kelbeck in the hand, but you still might want to have Agido in your deck because it allows you to mill 5 cards. But in general, you have to be a little bit careful with those Ishizu millers in a mirror match, because the opponent also gets to mill 5 cards, and the opponent could mill Shufflers or tier names and get a significant advantage by milling 5 cards from your Agido. So you might want to set up Abyss Dweller before committing to mill 5 from the opponent's deck, but milling from your own deck plays into the hand trap effect of Kelbeck. And then most lists play Bystials, because those are the strongest hand traps in a mirror match. Also they are non-aqua dark monsters, which allows you to fuse them into Muddragon. So you play 3 Magnemud, 3 Druid Swarm, and somewhere between 1 and 3 Saronir. This is by far the worst Bystial, but Boldrake is not released yet, but you might still want to have at least 1 Saronir in your deck, so that Magnemud can search a Saronir when you have Druid Swarm already in the hand. And keep in mind, you can always steal the opponent's Magnemud with Dark, and then you get to trigger the effect of Magnemud to search in the end phase. And then, for additional non-engine, you can play Super Poly, Droplet, or Talons. And for the extra deck, you play all kinds of fusions that you could make in this deck with your tier names, for example Kid Carlos, Rukalos Kaleidoheart, and then Muddragon, Garura, Dragostapellia, and then Abyss Dweller for the mirror match, Beatrice because you get to rank 6 with Bystials and Garura, and then Zeus because going second you could try to make Abyss Dweller and then overlay Zeus on top of that, Baguska against the shifter decks like Fluanaries, and then Redoer to detach Sharon for card effect and resolve the effect of Sharon to fusion summon. And then Dark, which can steal the opponent's Magnemud, Merly or Kid Carlos from their graveyard, and then you can link climb with Dark into either Elf or Sprint. And your side deck should be prepared to beat the Mirror Match, Sprite and Fluanaries, which is the reason why we see Zombie World, because this card shuts down Fluanaries completely, and with Neko World Banshee we can access the Zombie World. Cards like Dark Ruler and Droplet beat Sprite board, while Droplet also beats the opponent's Abyss Dweller in a mirror match. And with Imperm you have a little bit more answers against Fluanaries. There are some other cards that you could play in this deck, for example Volo, another rank 6 for the mirror match, or Orsa the Earth Charmer, which can force out the opponent's Shufflers in the graveyard. And for Konami events you had to play timeout cards like Scattershot, which you can send with Sprint, but for dueling book tournaments you don't need any timeout cards at all. And if you have never played full power Ishizu Tearlaments before, don't worry, I will give you a brief explanation how this deck works and some basic combo lines. But keep in mind, the nature of this deck is that you have to freestyle a lot and make your endboards with the cards that you mill, which will be completely different in every single game, which is also one of the reasons why this deck is so skillful. But let's say we start with Pearl Rhino or Rhinoheart. Then we can just normal summon the Rhinoheart and then Rhinoheart send Toughness. And we always want to send Toughness first because we can trigger Sharon later with the Redoer, and Merly can be accessed with Sprint. So Toughness and Rhinoheart back into the deck for Kid Carlos. And now Kid Carlos can search the Merly. If you have Merly already in the hand, you can also search Scream or Salik. And by the way, if you don't have Rhinoheart in the opening hand or Pearl Rhino, then you can just normal summon Merly, try to hit a tier name with the Merely random mill 3. And if you hit a name, you can still go into kit colors, and then kit colors can search Rhino Heart. And then you just summon the Rhino Heart with the kit colors. But here we went for Merely because we opened Rhino Heart. And now kit colors, summon the Merely, send herself. And then kit colors chaining 1, Merely chaining 2, we mill 8 cards in total. And here we are very likely going to hit a tier name, for example the Sharon or Merely. And with the Sharon we can make the Root colors. Also we hit the Scream, which means we can search a trap. And with the Salik we can search another extender. And here we can search Sharon, which we can use for rank 4 plays. And first of all, Sharon and kit colors back to the bottom of the deck for Root colors. Now Sharon, discard Modora. And here we hit a Merely, so we can go into Muddragon, or we could make Merely and Toughness into Garura. Garura gives us 1 draw. So here I went for the Garura line. So we go into Garura, and then if Garura is sent to the graveyard, for example for a Link summon, we get to draw 1 card. And here we draw Kelbeck. But let's say we milled a Rhino Heart with the mill 5 from Kit Carlos or the mill 3 from the Merely. Then we could also use the Rhino Heart graveyard effect, and then we discard the Toughness, summon the Rhino Heart. And now we can overlay into Abyss Dweller. And by the way, if you have Sprite Elf protects the monsters that Sprite Elf points to. So for example, the Abyss Dweller and the Rukalos cannot be targeted by Imperm from the opponent. And for this reason, you should try to summon your endboard pieces in the zones that Sprite Elf could point to. So this is just one potential endboard we could go for. We could also use a Bysteel in the hand as a fusion material for Muddragon, and then use Muddragon as a second rank 4 to go into Abyss Dweller. But then we don't have the Bysteel in the hand as graveyard interruption against the opponent. And then during the opponent's turn we have follow up with Sprite Elf, so Sprite Elf can revive the Merely, and Merely mills 3 cards. And here we could hit any tier monster, for example another copy of Merely, and then Merely allows us to fusion summon during the opponent's turn. Also we should probably use Dweller at some point, and then we get the Rhino Heart into the graveyard, and now we can make Kaleido Heart. Yeah, and by the way, I would recommend using the Merely on the board and keeping the Toughness, because then we could use Modora on our own Toughness later during the opponent's turn. And if we shuffle back one tearlaments monster by the effects of the tier monsters themselves, or with the Ishizu shufflers, then we get to trigger Pearl Rhino, and Pearl Rhino allows us to pop 1 card on the field, either from our side or from the opponent's side. And Pearl Rhino allows us to pop 1 card on our side or on the opponent's side during the opponent's turn. And we can basically trigger Pearl Rhino whenever we want by using the Ishizu shufflers on our own tearlaments monsters in the graveyard. And while we have Pearl Rhino on the board, Kaleido Heart is at 3500 and Rukalos is at 4000, because she gets 500 boost from the Pearl Rhino and 500 boost from Abyss Dweller. But after you detach Rhino Heart from Abyss Dweller, the Dweller boost disappears, so keep that in mind. And this is just a basic endboard that you could always go for if you have average or good mills and the opponent doesn't have any interruptions. But in actual games the opponent will have interruptions at some point, and then you must come up with your own endboard depending on the cards that you milled. And next week there will be a Tearlaments Format tournament, all format library. If you are interested, check out the link in the video description. And now let's go over one replay which was a tournament final in one of the previous tournaments. Alright, and now let's check out the replay for actual Tearlaments Format gameplay. And as I said before, this is a tournament final between me and your worst nightmare. And if you want to see the deck lists of both players, check out the link in the video description. And here, I lost the RPS, but my opening hand looks pretty solid for going second. So I have double Bysteel and Toughness, so triple hand trap against the opponent. But the opponent also opened pretty well with Scream, Rhino Heart and Pearl Rhino. So the opponent decides to start with Rhino Heart Scream. Scream hits nothing, Rhino Heart can send the Toughness. And in this format you always want to start with Toughness first, because you can trigger the Sharon later with Redoer and Merely later with Sprint. And here I decided to drop Saronir on Toughness because I want to bring both Bysteels on the field, and then I could make a Beatrice. But if I start with Druid Swarm, then my opponent could theoretically shuffle back their own Toughness to prevent me from summoning Druid Swarm. And if I start with Saronir, it's less likely my opponent decides to use a shuffler to stop me from summoning the Bysteel, which is why I decided to start with the weaker Bysteel first. And then Pearl Rhino grabbing Sharon. Sharon has to discard the Druid Swarm to mill 3 cards, and my opponent hits Merely. So fantastic mill. Unfortunately for my opponent, I have Druid Swarm, a second Bysteel to stop the Merely from fusion summoning. And now my opponent has to go into Redoer. So Redoer trying to detach Sharon for card effect. And here I chain Toughness. And I also mill pretty well, so I kinda sacked the opponent here, but we still have to play it out until the end because my opponent could make a comeback with Scream during my turn. So Sharon from the opponent chainlink 1. Then my Sharon Kelbeck chainlink 3 and Mudora chainlink 4. So we shuffle back. Then Kelbeck mill 5. And my opponent resolved the Kelbeck incorrectly because we have to mill 5 cards first before my opponent gets to summon the Kid Carlos. And I hope you can see the difficulty of this format pretty clear because it's so easy to mess up stuff like this when you have to resolve chainlink 4 and higher every single time. And then we get a couple more triggers because I milled Merly and Agido and I decided to use Agido because my opponent already went through all 3 tier names, so I don't give my opponent any advantage by letting my opponent mill 5 cards. While I, on the other hand, have still a couple of tier cards left that I could mill and that would advance my game state if I mill them during my opponent's first turn. So Merly, Agido, and now my opponent is forced to use their Keldo to stop my Merly, and my opponent also decides to shuffle back my Magnamod. Because if I get to mill 5 cards with Agido, then my opponent should try to make my mills as bad as possible by shuffling back bad mills like Magnamod. And now we resolve the Agido mill 5, and I hit double Havness. Perfect. So now I can declare Havness, and my opponent has Kid Carlos, Pearl Rhino, and Pearl Rhino can pop my Saronir. Yeah, and you can see a complexity in positions like that. Now we have to resolve another chaining 4. So Saronir chaining 1, Havness chaining 2, Scream chaining 3, Saronir from my opponent. No, my Saronir is chaining 4 and Saronir from the opponent is chaining 1. Yeah, you also want to use Saronir just for the deck thinning because when you remove one bicycle from your deck, your mills with the Ishizu millers become slightly better. And then I put back Havness and Havness for my own Kid Carlos, and now my Kid Carlos gets to search. And that plays into Havness from the opponent. And my opponent hits Mudora, Crime, and Orange Light. And now my opponent can add back one of the banished tier cards with the milled Crime. Yeah, and this is another advantage of having Crime in the main deck. You can always add back your cards from the banished pile. So Havness, and now Kid Carlos. Yeah, Kid Carlos can summon from the hand or from the graveyard, but my opponent has the Merly in the grave, so why not summoning Merly from the graveyard and keeping Toughness in the hand? And now milling 5 cards, and that allows my opponent to trigger Rhino Heart and Salik. So Rhino Heart hits the board, and then Dark. So Dark target Magna, because then my opponent could get a Magna trigger effect on their side and search a bicycle in the end phase. I don't want that to happen. So I decide to shuffle back my own Magnamod and prevent the Dark from summoning the Magnamod. Yeah, also shuffling back both Mudoras from the opponent. That means my opponent won't have Mudora access to interrupt me during my turn, but my opponent has still one Keldo left, so one Keldo could interrupt my own fusion summons. And now my opponent is forced to link summon the Rhino Heart and the Dark into Elf, and Rhino Heart gets banished because Rhino Heart was summoned from the graveyard. And then Elf into Diviner, and Diviner can dump Mudora. And now my opponent gained access to both shufflers again, which is a little bit unfortunate for me. So I have to find a good sequencing to play through double shuffler, Scream, Pearl Rhino, and Havness in the hand. And here in the standby phase, my opponent decides to use redo effect, which is a little bit incorrect in my opinion, because in other formats it's completely reasonable to use the redo effect in the standby phase to attach. But in this format, you don't have that many good cards that you could attach, because most tearlaments decks have 30 monsters, and maybe 10 or 12 spells and traps combined. So you are most likely going to hit a monster, and the monsters that you hit are monsters that you don't want to have as material under Redoer. For example, Sharon or Ishizu Shufflers. So if my opponent is forced to use Redoer, I will get the effects of my own cards that are detached, and then I could use the Sharon to fusion summon. So in the main phase, I decided to start with Kid Carlos, and Kid can summon from the graveyard or from the hand. I currently don't have any tier names in the graveyard, so I decided to summon Merly from the hand. And then Merly chaining 1, Kid Carlos chaining 2, so I mill 8 cards, and I hit Rhino Heart, Saronir, Salik, Sharon. So a couple of cards with trigger effects. And now we have a huge chain. So Rhino, Salik, Saronir. I decided to not use Sharon yet because my opponent has a shuffler in the graveyard and my opponent decides to use the shuffler. So shuffling back my Rhino Heart, my Merly, and a shuffler on my side, and it forces me to chain my own Modora, and my Modora shuffles back the Keldo from my opponent, the Kid Colors, and my Merly, because I want to use Sprint sending Merly later, and for Sprint I need to have at least one Merly in the deck. Also, I might want to hit Merly with random mills later in the turn, but it is not possible if I have all 3 copies of Merly currently in the graveyard or on the field. So shuffling back Merly, searching Rhino Heart, and I could still normal summon the Rhino Heart, I think. And now my opponent decides to hit me with Sprite Elf. So Elf summoned back Merly, and then Merly chaining 1, Scream chaining 2. Okay. Yeah, now my opponent is down to 4 cards in the deck, but my opponent hit a couple of solid mills, for example both shufflers. And now I have to get rid of both shufflers again. So Kelbeck, which got triggered by the Merly and Scream, milling card from the opponent's deck. So I decide to use Kelbeck, bounce back the Sprint, which also removes the protection that Elf gives on redo and the cards that could theoretically be summoned in this zone. And now my opponent was able to resolve Havness, make it Carlos. So Kid Carlos and Sharon, and now Sharon can fuse because I'm out of shufflers. And then Kaleido Heart hits the board, and Kaleido Heart can spin my Druid Swarm, then I don't get the effect of Druid Swarm to send. And now I was just checking if Havness was already used, because there was so much stuff going on in this turn already that I forgot which cards were already used and which cards weren't used. It's only turn 2, and we are already 27 minutes in the game, which is absolutely crazy when you think about it. And I think that speaks for itself for the quality of this format. So Dark, trying to summon Sharon from my opponent. And here my opponent hits me with Havness. And then chaining to Keldo. So preventing me from getting the body with Dark. And then Havness gets to the cards. And because the opponent already decked Finn super hard, my opponent hit a Merly. And now my opponent could fusion summon again with Merly in my turn. So Root Colors hits the board, and now my opponent can use the Pearl Rhino. So Pearl Rhino popping Kelbeck. And then I go into Rhino Heart. So Rhino Heart sending Havness. And now Root Colors to negate Havness. And now I decide to use Pearl Rhino, because I wanted to bait out the Pearl Rhino pop from the opponent first before I commit to my own Pearl Rhino. Otherwise my opponent could use their Pearl Rhino to pop my Pearl Rhino. So gripping Sharon, and then Dark Crash into Redo. If my opponent decides to use Redo effect here, then I would get Sharon. So my opponent decides to not use the Redo. Also, I could still crash into Kaleido Heart and get the Dark Search. So Dark gets destroyed, and I get to search Havness. And then in the main phase 2, Sharon, discard Havness. Yeah, and I think my opponent already used all of the names, so I could theoretically resolve Kelbeck here. Let's see what I decided to do. So Merly. Yeah, I think I probably resolved Kelbeck already or something like that. And now I go into Kaleido Heart. Kaleido Heart spin the Pearl Rhino from my opponent. And no, Kaleido Heart spin the Kaleido Heart from the opponent, and then Pearl Rhino pop the Pearl Rhino from my opponent. And then Dweller, and because Dark crash into Redoer, I can make Zeus on top of that. So Dweller and then Zeus, and now I clear the board of my opponent. My opponent decides to chain the Redoer. I used Sharon already. No, I did not use Sharon already, so I get to summon Kaleido Heart and I get the Sharon effect. But I could also send Sharon with Kaleido Heart, so it doesn't make a big difference. Now I get to summon Kid Carlos, and then Kid Carlos adds Merly. Yeah. I have used the effect of Kid Colors to take out and mill this turn, but not the effect to search. So I am able to end on Salik, Crime, and both tier monsters while breaking the board of the opponent. Now Redoer attaches Magnamat, and then just attacking over Kid Carlos, which is perfectly fine for me. And now Sharon, Zeus, and I decide to use Salik on the Zeus board wipe. So Kaleido Heart comes back, I get to send Sharon, and Kaleido Heart gets to spin, and it is just more than enough. And now we go into game 2. And here my opponent was able to go first again. This time both of us opened Pearl Rhino again. And I have Magna Mod and Droplet. So let's see how this one plays out. So my opponent decides to start with Pearl Rhino grabbing Sharon, and then Sharon discard Modora. And then my opponent milled Bestial Lubellion, which is pretty interesting, because this is not the most common choice in Ishizu Tearlaments. And then Merly, I hit the Merly with my Magna Mod, but it gives my opponent the opportunity to pop Magna Mod later and then Dark steal Magna Mod, use the Magna Mod for their own search and also as a tribute for Lubellion. Yeah, so this card can be a double-edged sword sometimes, but it's a pretty strong card if the opponent doesn't get to exploit the Magna Mod for their own purpose. Yeah, now my opponent still gets into Kid Colors, Kaleido Heart can pop my Magna, and then Mud Dragon. And with the Mud Dragon we go into Dark. Dark can steal the Magna Mod, now Magna Mod gets to search a Bestial for the opponent, and then Lubellion. Lubellion plays Regained, and then Carlos take out. Yeah, and going first to Regained is actually pretty strong, because every time I banish a monster from the opponent, my opponent gets to draw for each Bestial summon on my side. Also my opponent can loop Magna Mod and overwhelm me with Bestials in the grind game. So Crime, add back Merly, and then Abyss Dweller, Druid Swarm. But my opponent did not end on tier cards in end board, which is kinda extraordinary. So I start with Pearl Rhino and then Abyss Dweller. I think my opponent should have Shotgun Dweller in the standby phase to not play into talents. And here I have Droplet, so Droplet can discard my Keldo, and then I can negate Dweller. And now I resolve Pearl Rhino, and then I can use talents. And currently my hand didn't look that good, so I was trying to get more cards with the talents. I get a Merly, okay. And now on resolution, Keldo trying to shuffle back the shufflers from my opponent. And my opponent decides to chain their Modora, so Modora put back Sharon, Crime, and my Droplet to make my mills worse. And then Pearl Rhino popping my Pearl Rhino, which is a little bit unfortunate, but I should be still able to play through that. So Sharon, discard Modora, milling 3 cards, including Agido. And here I think it's better to not use Agido, because then my opponent would get into tier engine and I don't want it to happen. So just Scream and my opponent gets Regained. And I decide to use Modora to shuffle back the target for Regained, because then my opponent doesn't get the Magna Mod Summon and the Magna Mod Search. And now Rhino Heart, sending Huffness, gets hit with Druid Swarm. And then Regained on Huffness, which gives my opponent a Merly draw. And now Redoer attacking over Dweller. And then in the battle phase, Redoer to take out, Sharon to Fusion Summon. Into Kid Colors, and now Kid searching the Salik. And yeah, I forgot to resolve the Scream, so I fix the game state now by searching Salik later. And now we should have illegal game state again. And then Kid Colors summoning the Merly. And then I mill 8 cards, and now we get just Huffness. Yeah, just Huffness, because I sided down on Salik and Scream going second. And then Druid Swarm sending it dark, and Redo comes back in the end phase. And now in the standby phase, I decide to not use Redo on the opponent, because my opponent might be out of tier engine, but then my opponent revealed the second Pearl Rhino. Yeah, and now it's getting a little bit rough. So Merly, I can chain Huffness. Okay. And then Rukalos. And my opponent gets to summon Magna with Regained. Magna Mod. And then Sprint, Druid Swarm to send my elf. And here I chained my elf, which plays into Huffness. Now 3 additional mills from my opponent. But I also get 3 mills from my melee. And then Keldo on the opponent. My opponent sets a chain Keldo. Yeah, this is also something that you can always do when you are out of your good extra deck monsters like Dark. You just use shufflers, shuffle back your own extra deck monsters and use them again. And Pearl Rhino to pop Rukalos. But Rukalos comes back when she is destroyed by a card effect while she was fusion summoned previously. So Rukalos, and then my opponent hits a couple of cards, and here I decide to use Modora, so Modora shuffling back, Rukalos comes back. And then we go into Dark, and then crash Dark into Redoer. And now my opponent can do the same play that I did in the previous game, crashing Dark to search, and then Magna I take over, Redoer. And then in the main phase 2, Sharon, which gets answered by my Rukalos. So Rukalos is and Merly, and now I can use Merly. And I don't hit Rhino hard, but I go into Kid and my opponent decides to scoop the game, which was a little bit surprising to me because I did not expect to win that. My plan was to hit a Rhino hard with my mills and then Kaleido hard, shuffle back the regain because this is really annoying in the grind game. Got a Pearl Rhino so that my opponent cannot pop my cards is a quick effect after resolving a shuffler. So I win this game and the entire match 2-0, and honestly I did not expect to win this game because I was kind of salty that I didn't mill the Rhino hard, and yeah, I think my opponent made also some minor misplays, maybe there were bad lines from my opponent, and I hope you can see the interactions of this deck in a mirror match. And I think this format is extremely skillful and interactive, so even if you open slightly better than the opponent, you still have to hustle really hard and need to have some solid technical play in order to win the mirror match, which is why I love the format and it should deserve more attention. Yeah, so I hope you get more attention for tier format after the Galzo money match, and we have also the tournament on format library. Check it out. Link will be in the video description. Anyways, see you in the next video. Have a nice day. Bye.